7 years ago, I started a series known as The World of Elavida. This series was meant to explain the world surrounding the story of Stardust, a story I had been working on since I was a very, very young child. I made it to introduce the concepts, themes, places, and people that inhabited my world. 3 years ago, I chose to revisit this project in a series aptly titled The World of Elavida Revisited. This revived series was not only meant to be a look into my world, but also meant to encourage a complete overhaul of my view on my own story. It tests my ability to sit down and really ask myself, where am I going with this? If I want this world to be real, not just for me, but for others, I need to sit down and really work at figuring out what this world looks like, feels like, acts like, thinks like, etc. I believe episode 2.5 will be a great look into how far I'm willing to deviate from my original concept and how much I've grown as a writer, artist, and storyteller in not only 7 years, but nearly 20 years since this story first began. With that all out of the way, let me introduce to you 2 out of the 4 main characters for my story. Timber Vulcan and Aquamarine were 2 characters I added to the story of Stardust shortly before I began posting it on DeviantArt around 15 years ago. They were originally created to be audience surrogate characters, basically meaning that they would be the ones who would ask the questions the audience needed to know the answers to, and lead them through the story from basic newbies to full-fledged heroes. The problem was, because they were added to the story so late into development, and right before I started putting the story to paper, their importance and significance to the story amounted to diddly squat. Characters like Sonar and Sage had more concrete storylines and backgrounds in comparison, which meant during their redesign episode, I was able to more easily just talk about how their redesigns link up to their hometowns and personalities, without going into too much detail on their backstories. For Timber and Aqua, that's kind of an impossibility. A lot of how these 2 appear is intrinsically linked to their storylines, and the overall storyline of the story of Stardust. In a way, I can't really talk about their redesigns without also talking about all of the story element process and tweakings I had to do along the way. For me, this made episode 2.5 a lot more nerve-wracking than I had originally thought. Redesigning the 4 main characters was always something I was looking forward to. But I did kinda psych myself out, like, a lot. But I think that's just a tribute to how much I truly care about these characters and getting them right. I started writing the script and developing ideas for their designs simultaneously, until I realized I didn't have any concrete answers as to why they looked the way they did. I had some vague personality traits for them, but nothing that made them interesting enough to still hold the coveted title of main characters. So, for this episode, instead of simply going through my thought process and how I chose to redesign these characters, I'm gonna give you a look into their backstories, up until the actual start of the story of Stardust plotline, pulling each character out of the rut of horrifically boring to write, and channeling some new life into them. So, let's finally get this redesign started. And who better to lead that charge than my big puppy, Timber Vulcan. Timber comes from a very well-to-do family, living in the upper echelon of the pyramid Umerahg, otherwise known as the Realtor Pyramid. Ever since he was born, he never had to want for any physical or monetary needs. He can have the best education, the best friends, the best job, and overall, the best life that anyone could want, if he so desired. All he had to do was ask. He lived in a beautiful mansion surrounded by beautiful gardens and beautiful people. The problem was, what he desired was often harder to come by. He wanted genuine connections, honesty, familial love, and community, not what was masquerading as love and affection just to get his money and status. But his parents were always busy and stressed. With Umeragh's ever-changing landscape and people, their ability to stay on top of the pyramid was always uncertain. Many others like them would find themselves too comfortable and end up falling in the ranks to quickly be overtaken by newcomers. Some of Timber's own former neighbors had been pushed off of the edge of the floating city many years ago. Despite Timber knowing this, he could never shake the desire for more. Most of the time, his life revolved around his cavalcade of nannies that his parents hired to look after him while they were busy, which was all of the time. But one nanny turned out to be Timber's favorite. She was kind, likable, knew a lot about the world, and encouraged Timber even with his most outlandish dreams. So, one day, he decided to follow her home, thinking that maybe he could stay with her for a little while and not have to bother his parents when she left. However, he found that he ended up following her for a very long time. From the upper echelon to lower and lower and lower sectors, till he found himself walking down crowded dirt roads at the bottom of the pyramid. Houses built on unstable legs and with shoddy materials. Large swaths of fabric replaced what should have been doors. People lined the streets, living under huts, blankets, and anything they could find. This is when Timber discovered that his favorite nanny was living a very difficult life. She lived in a small, rundown hovel and took care of her ailing father. And yet, she still held a smile on her face, telling Timber that she was still grateful that she didn't live in the slums below the pyramid. Timber's life was never really the same after this. He began to see the errors in his companions for the first time. How could they dare complain about their life when they live so lavishly? How could he bear to complain about his own? He tried to tell others about the lower sectors, asking them to help those clearly in need with anything they could give. That is when he learned his community wasn't really a community. They laughed in his face, brushed him off, and insisted they didn't need to help those who couldn't help themselves. Timber became fed up with his stuck-up acquaintances and began to rebel. Admittedly, in very small ways at first. Refusing to go out with his so-called friends, refusing to buy them anything new. He started trying to learn how to cook instead of just letting his nannies cook. And finally, he began fashioning his own clothes from old swaths of fabric that were often thrown off the edge of the upper echelon. Soon enough, his acquaintances now refused to associate with him, with his new dirty and disheveled appearance. One day, Timber decided to take it a step further. He remembered hearing his nanny talk about how she was grateful that she didn't live in the slums below the pyramid. He decided he must know what's down there. He made his way to the bottom and found a large community he'd never heard of. There, he met two very important people. The first was Sir Donovan, a religious leader who introduced Timber to the Fellowship, a community of individuals who seek to help those in need, no matter who they are or where they come from, following in the footsteps of the goddess Shivka. The second one was a younger teen, a self-sufficient, independent hunter-gatherer who worked to protect her community with everything she had. This is what started Timber's desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves and aid those who were struggling. Though he still has some tendencies to show off how rich he is and how little he knows about the world, he has a good heart and a desire for change. Oh, good lord. Timber's design has always been one that I loved, but I could never draw it properly. I looked through so many pictures of oversized clothing and jackets for both men and women to get a better idea on how to lay them on the body. I like the idea that he started dressing more informal when he still lived on the pyramid, as a small way to protest how unjust the hierarchy is. The jacket being yellow was always gonna stay. There was no way I was changing such an integral part of the design. But it being layered with the hoodie was unexpected for me. Looking up New York streetwear, most men were wearing double and sometimes triple layered clothing. I've personally never been to New York, so I wasn't familiar with that kind of style. And as much as I liked his original little fluffy tail, it just didn't make sense with an actual Eastern wolf tail. I think it still looks cute, but just very different. I think this new overall design really gives a lot of insight into his personality, which I am excited to work on more. Did you know that you too can support the production? Sharing, commenting, and/or liking my videos is always the greatest way to support any creator. I do post a lot more on Instagram in short-form content and works in progress. If you ever wonder where I am in between videos, you can likely check my Instagram for any updates. Besides that, I do have a Redbubble where I post my art to be made into many products, including shirts, books, stickers, phone cases, and much more. I also have a Subscribestar where you can support me monthly, but I also have been tossing around ideas for changing up the tiers on the Subscribestar. For now, I only have 2, but I'm working on the possibility of developing at least 5 new tiers in the distant future. Let me know what you want to see from me, and I'll consider adding them once the tiers are actually launched. For now, you can see art and videos a week in advance by becoming either a red penguin or a black elephant supporter. Thank you for all your support. Now let's get back to the video. Next up, Aquamarine. Yeah, this isn't gonna take too long. There's really nothing special about Aqua. He was always meant to be just a happy-go-lucky little guy. You know, the funny side character to the more serious main character. Not much development at all. Yeah, so let's get right into it. Hey, Aqua? It's been a while, hasn't it? I hadn't realized I never drew you again after your old 2020 redesign. Kind of shocking, I know, right? Yeah, sure, go right ahead. What? Do you really think you're on the same level as all those others? Why do you think that? You're right. You were never as developed as any of those other heroes. But believe me, it was never because I didn't like you. I've always loved you, Aqua. Of course! I couldn't imagine the story of Stardust without you. I need to apologize, Aqua. I left you in the dirt as a very unambitious and naive writer. I didn't ever care to write down your story. Or Timber's. Heck, even Sky and Syosuke are gonna have complete overhauls to their backstories too. Once I get to them, of course. I love all 4 of you dearly, and I always knew you had a place in the world of Elavida. But I was just never sure where. That is, until now. I do indeed. And I think it's time you finally met your family. What do you say? Then let's go. 17 years ago, in the vast slums of Umerahg, beneath the floating city, the small tribe's religious leader, Sir Donovan, was awoken in the middle of the night to the incessant wails of a child. Stepping onto his front porch, he found a small baby girl laid at his doorstep. With only a blanket wrapped tightly around her small body, Sir Donovan did not know this child or where she had come from. But all the same, he picked her up and took her in. Aqua grew up in the slums of Umerahg, along with the other children in her tribe. She was the oldest of the small group, and was often in charge of looking after them and making sure they were safe. Aqua didn't have a lot, physically speaking, but her life was always full of love and fellowship. However, as the years went on, more and more people fell from the pedestal of what was known as the floating city, Umerahg. The slums beneath the city expanded greatly, and Aqua's once small tribe began to grow in number. Food, supplies, medicine, and homes were becoming increasingly scarce. Aqua decided something needed to be done about this. On her 13th birthday, she ventured out into the unknown, past the shadows of Umerahg and into the vast expanse of the world of Elavida. She was determined to bring something back for her people. She taught herself how to hunt, fish, and forage for food. She even got lessons from some of the older residents on how to build small structures for their growing population. Aqua began to make it her life's mission to aid her people in any way that she could. From ages 13 to 16, she made great strides in teaching her tribe the right way to fish, hunt, and scavenge, and began leading expeditions out into the world to find resources. It was when Aqua turned 16 that she first met Timber. At first, the two didn't know what to think about each other. Timber was a flashy, brash, in-your-face, and sometimes arrogant boy, though she could see he had a heart of gold. The one thing about Timber that always upset her was that he was highly educated. Growing up, Aqua needed to prioritize her and her tribe's survival more than anything else, meaning she didn't have much time for studying, and even at 17 years old, she couldn't read. This initially hindered her friendship with Timber, as he came to her speaking big and fanciful words. She initially felt that he was trying to mock her. Despite this first rocky meeting, the two ended up bonding and becoming fast friends. Timber began teaching Aqua small bits about the world and its many wonders, along with its many troubles. Aqua's head became filled with thoughts of the outside world, of places and people she had never seen before. Timber himself talked a big game about the other tribes, but other than humans, neither of them had met someone from the other tribes. Her heart was filled with longing while her head spun around the problems the world faced. Lack of resources seemed to be a huge one. Food shortages in rural areas, medicine scarcity all over the world, financial hardships, and tribal disputes, just to name a few. Aqua began feeling antsy, wanting to see the world in the way that it truly was, not in the way people told her through stories. Perhaps now that her tribe is learning how to care for themselves, she can go out into the world too. Aqua always felt like she could be helping more people, that she had something inside of her that was meant for a bigger stage than her admittedly still small home, that the people of the world of Elavida need her too, maybe as much as she needs them. With her best friend at her side, who knows what these two will get up to now. Yeah, so I tossed around the idea of changing one of my main characters to be a woman for a couple of years now. Mainly, I went back and forth on Timber and Aqua. It's not that I had a problem with all four of my main characters being men, but I did feel like I was missing something. Or rather, someone. Admittedly, the reason it ended up being Aqua that I switched up was because a few years ago, while I was still on Tumblr, someone commented under a picture of Aqua something along the lines of, "Oh, she's so cute." And I never really correct people on their assumption of my character's genders or sex, because I know I tend to make most, if not all, my characters a bit more feminine. It's a curse, I know. But it really got me thinking in detail of if the change would be worth it or not. And by golly, I think it was. Changing something so integral to a character, like their gender or sex, helps me be a bit more open about changes in their personalities and backstories. I wasn't nearly as precious with Aqua's design as I was Timber's. I've always loved Timber's design, I just wanted to update him more. But for Aqua's design, with her new backstory, Her older design didn't make any sense. She still has some of her aquatic themes, but she's no longer a swimmer. I maintain that while I did want to give her a New York street aesthetic, I also wanted to make her clothes very practical. Hence, her boots are good for traction, her clothes are flexible and breathable for long hikes, she's wearing climbing gloves and bandages to protect her arms and hands, and it's obvious that she treks around in warmer climates. I think the inspirations from her old design are still very clearly visible, but more realistic. Well, as real as a fantasy world can get. Aqua is a mix of a ribbon eel, zebra eel, and a parrotfish. That's what makes her an abnormal hybrid. And that's all, folks. I do have a lot more detail on Timber and Aqua's personalities and stories, so let me know if you'd like to hear more about that, or really about any of the other characters of Elavida. From the heroes to the villains to the side characters, heaven knows the rest of the hybrid cast is going to be chock full of interesting stories and tidbits. I didn't want to give too much away about Timber and Aqua because they are two of the main characters, and one of the main points of the story is seeing their growth. So I think a lot of it would just be backstory tidbits or little tidbits in the middle of the story. I also want to thank everyone over on Instagram who helped me out with this episode. If you follow my updates over there, you would see that I was having some issues with both characters' color palettes, and specifically Aqua's tail. I had a lot of freakouts during the almost 18-hour process, but I think that's just because I cared so much about the final product. These are 2 out of the 4 main characters for a story I've been developing for almost 2 decades. Their looks are integral to the story. I did get a lot of good ideas for moving forward in episode 3, which is gonna take a lot longer than episode 2.5. Naturally. I do hope to have it completed by June, and I do have some fun things I want to try for the next few months. And if you're interested in either Aqua or Timber, or you're interested in this final piece that I am doing, I will be posting a speed paint of it coming up probably in the next week. But if you're seeing this right now, it's probably already on my Subscribe Star if you want to go check that out. And this final picture is likely going to be posted on my Redbubble account for sale. And let me wrap this up here before it hits midnight and I turn back into a pumpkin. Thank you again for all your support. I love you all. Purple Zebra, out!